The Uber dropped me at the corner of Meadow Lane at 6:43 in the morning, and I tipped the driver more than I should have because he had not once tried to make conversation during the 40-minute ride from Greenwich Hospital, and that kind of mercy deserves acknowledgment. I was 68 years old. My right hand was wrapped in surgical gauze from the base of my palm to just below my elbow, a thick white bandage that the discharge nurse had taped down with the particular firmness of someone who had watched too many patients undo her work the moment they left the building. The orthopedic surgeon, a careful young man named Dr. Reeves, had told me the procedure on my wrist joint had gone exactly as planned. He had also told me I should not be traveling alone for at least 48 hours, that I should have someone with me, that recovery from joint surgery in a man my age required rest and supervision. I had thanked him and signed the discharge papers and called the Uber myself. Bradley had not come into the hospital, not on the day of the surgery, not during the 2 days I spent in recovery, not on the morning I was discharged. He had sent a text on the first evening, "Hope the surgery went well, Dad. Let me know if you need anything." And I had read it 3 times trying to locate the version of my son I recognized in those words and had not entirely succeeded. But I told myself what fathers tell themselves. He was busy, the timing was difficult. He would come when he could. The morning air on Meadow Lane smelled like damp grass and wood smoke from somewhere 2 streets over, the particular combination that had always meant October in Connecticut to me, even now, even in April, when the memory of seasons bleeds into itself. I had lived on this street for 22 years. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every tree that had grown too large for its planting box, every house whose porch light stayed on all night and whose didn't. I walked up the front path slowly. My right hand throbbed with the low, insistent rhythm that Dr. Reeves had warned me about, not sharp pain, but the deep ache of something that had been taken apart and put back together and needed time to understand what had been done to it. With my left hand, I reached into my jacket pocket and found my keys. The front door of 14 Meadow Lane had a smart lock system, a keypad and fingerprint scanner that Bradley had installed 18 months ago after he'd read an article about home security and arrived one Saturday morning with a contractor and an enthusiasm I had not had the heart to discourage. The system was good technology, I had to admit that. You could lock or unlock the door from anywhere in the world. Using a phone application, could set temporary access codes for visitors, could check the entry log and see exactly who had come and gone and when. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The panel emitted 3 short beeps in rapid succession. A small red light blinked at me. Access denied. I tried again more carefully, making sure the full pad of my thumb was flat against the reader, the way the instruction manual had specified. 3 beeps. Red light. I entered the 6-digit code I had used for 2 years, the one I had memorized the way I memorized all important numbers, by repeating it until it lived in my fingers rather than my head. 3 beeps. Red light. I stood on my own front porch and looked at the keypad the way you look at something that has stopped making sense, not with anger yet, but with the particular confusion that comes before anger. When your brain is still insisting, there must be a logical explanation, that you have simply made an error, that the world has not actually done what it appears to have done. That was when I saw the suitcases. They were stacked against the porch railing to my left, partially hidden by the angle of the doorframe, which was why I had not noticed them immediately. 2 large rolling suitcases and the brown leather overnight bag Eleanor had given me for our 20th anniversary, the one with my initials stamped on the front pocket in gold letters that had worn mostly to shadow now. All of them mine, all of them packed, all of them placed outside with the neat, deliberate arrangement of someone who had taken their time. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, a text from Bradley. It had been sent 40 minutes ago while I was in the Uber. "Dad, heads up, there are some serious electrical issues in the house, wiring problems that need to be fixed right away. Contractor says it's not safe to be inside while they work. Shouldn't take more than a few days. Stay at a hotel and I'll cover the costs. Sorry for the short notice." I read the message once, then again, then a third time, the way you reread something when the words are perfectly clear, but the meaning refuses to settle. There was no smell of work in the air, no contractor's truck in the driveway, no notice on the door, no equipment, No orange safety cones, no evidence of any kind that anyone had come to this house to fix anything. What there was my luggage on the porch and a lock that no longer knew my hand. I called Bradley. 4 rings, voicemail. Bradley, it's your father. I'm standing outside the house and the lock isn't working. Call me back. I called again. Voicemail. A 3rd time. The same. I lowered the phone and stood very still for a moment in the early morning quiet of Meadow Lane, listening to a robin somewhere in the maple tree at the edge of the property, singing with the uncomplicated confidence of a creature that had no opinion about what was happening on this porch. The door of the house next to ours opened. Martha Higgins stepped out onto her porch. She was 72 years old, a retired high school English teacher who had lived on Meadow Lane for longer than Eleanor and I had, who remembered the names of every child who had ever trick-or-treated at her door, who had brought food to our house for 2 weeks straight after Eleanor's funeral without once staying longer than was wanted. She was wearing her tan raincoat over what appeared to be pajamas, and she was holding her phone in both hands with the careful grip of someone who had been waiting for a reason to use it. She looked at me. She looked at the suitcases. Something moved across her face, recognition and then discomfort, and then a decision. Arthur, she said, her voice lower than usual. She came down her porch steps toward the hedge between our properties. You're back. Seems the lock's been changed, I said. I kept my voice even. I was concentrating on keeping my voice even. Martha pressed her lips together. She had the expression of a woman who had been sitting on something uncomfortable and had finally been given permission to set it down. She looked at her phone, then back at me. I saw them leave yesterday morning, she said quietly. Early. I was getting the paper. She hesitated. I didn't know what to make of it, Arthur, so I took a picture. I thought maybe I was wrong about what I was seeing. She held the phone out to me over the hedge. The photograph was time-stamped 6:47 the previous morning. It showed the front of my house, the driveway, the street beyond. Bradley was there wearing the jacket I had bought him 2 Christmases ago. Chloe stood beside him in sunglasses, despite the early hour, her carry-on bag at her feet. And next to Chloe, laughing at something with her hand on a large floral-patterned suitcase, was Diane Mercer. Chloe's mother, a woman who had accepted every favor I had ever extended to her family without once acknowledging that they were favors. They were loading themselves into a black SUV that was already waiting at the curb. All 3 of them were smiling. Bradley had his arm around Chloe's shoulders. Diane was already reaching for her own phone to take a selfie. There was no contractor. There had never been any electrical problem. I stood on the porch of my house of 22 years, holding Martha's phone, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not breaking exactly, but a slow, terrible clarification. The kind that comes when you have been refusing to see something clearly for a very long time, and the evidence finally arranges itself in a way that leaves no room left for the generous interpretation. 3 weeks before my surgery, Bradley had asked me to add him as an administrator on the Smart Lock application. In case of emergency while you're recovering, Dad, so I can let people in if you need anything. I had thought it was thoughtful. I had given him the access without hesitation. He had used it to lock me out of my own home on the morning I came home from the hospital while he was boarding a plane to the Bahamas. Do you know where they went? I asked Martha. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was something Eleanor had always said about me, that my voice was the last thing to show what I was carrying. Martha hesitated. I heard Diane say something about the Bahamas when they were loading the bags. She paused. 5 days, she said. I handed the phone back to Martha. My bandaged hand was beginning to throb harder now, whether from the morning cold or from something else entirely, I could not have said. I looked at my front door one more time, then I looked down at the porch at the welcome mat Eleanor had chosen, at the potted rosemary plant she had kept by the door for 15 years, that someone had moved 2 feet to the left at the small brass house numbers that she had polished herself every spring because she said a house should know its own address. I picked up the brown leather overnight bag with my left hand. I left the 2 large suitcases where they were. Martha, I said. She was watching me with the careful, watchful concern of someone who cares enough to tell you the truth, but isn't certain how much of it you can hold right now. Thank you, I said, for the picture, for telling me. Her chin trembled, once quickly controlled. "Arthur, where will you—" "I'll be all right," I said. "I have some things to do." I walked down the front path without looking back at the house, past Eleanor's rose bushes along the walk, still holding a few stubborn red blooms despite the April chill, exactly as she had always been, and out to the curb where I called another car. I did not allow myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not yet. There would be time for that later in a room somewhere alone. Right now, I had things to do, and a man who stops moving before he reaches somewhere safe has made a tactical error. The car came in 4 minutes. I got in, gave the address of the Post Road Motel, the first place I could think of that was close and cheap and would not require me to explain anything to anyone, and watched Meadow Lane disappear behind me through the rear window. The robin was still singing in the maple tree. I was 68 years old with a bandaged hand and one overnight bag, sitting in the back of a stranger's car, leaving the house I had lived in for 22 years because my son had changed the locks while I was in surgery. I reached into my jacket pocket with my left hand and felt the familiar weight of the small wooden box I carried everywhere. "Hold on, Eleanor," I thought. "I'm going to need you tonight." Martha still had the photograph on her phone when I looked at it the second time, and the second time was worse than the first. The first time your brain is still negotiating, running through alternative explanations, looking for the version of events that does not mean what it appears to mean. The second time that negotiation is over. The second time you are simply looking at what is true. I had been in surgery at 6:47 a.m. The anesthesia had not yet worn off when they were loading their luggage into that black SUV. I had been lying in a hospital bed with a drainage tube in my wrist while my son stood on my driveway and smiled for his mother-in-law's selfie. "How long have you been holding on to this?" I asked Martha. She pulled her cardigan tighter across her chest. The morning was cold enough that her breath made small clouds in the air between us. "Since yesterday morning," she said. "I kept thinking I must be misunderstanding something, that there must be a reason." She pressed her lips together. "But then, this morning I saw your name on the surgery schedule. I have a friend who works at Greenwich Hospital. She mentioned it weeks ago when you first told me about the procedure, and I thought, if he comes home today and I haven't said anything—" Her voice broke cleanly on the last word, and she stopped and collected herself with the dignity of a woman who had been teaching teenagers to diagram sentences for 30 years and knew how to hold a room. "I couldn't not tell you, Arthur. I just couldn't." I handed her phone back to her. My left hand was steady. I was concentrating very hard on keeping it steady. "Did you hear them say anything?" I asked. "Before they got in the car, anything about how long they'd be gone?" "Diane said 5 days. Martha's eyes were bright and wet, and she was not bothering to hide it anymore. She said it loud enough that I heard it from my porch. 5 days in the Bahamas, a pause that carried considerable weight. She sounded very pleased about it. 5 days. Bradley had not chosen a random morning. He had not acted impulsively, had not made a decision in haste that he might later regret. He had looked at the calendar, identified the day I was scheduled to come home from the hospital, weakened, disoriented, dependent, and he had chosen that specific morning to execute whatever this was. He had coordinated with Chloe. He had coordinated with Diane. He had changed the lock remotely from his phone, probably, while he was already at the airport, and then he had boarded a plane to the Bahamas and ordered a drink and waited for the wheels to come up. 3 weeks before my surgery, he had asked to be added as administrator on the SmartLock app. He had framed it as concern as preparation, and I had sat across from him at the kitchen table and thought, my son is being thoughtful. My son is thinking ahead. And I had opened the app and granted him full administrative access to my home while he nodded and thanked me and probably felt the particular private satisfaction of a plan coming together. Martha. I picked up the brown leather overnight bag with my left hand, the bandaged right arm held carefully against my body. "I need to ask you a favor. Not today, in a few days. I'll explain when the time comes." She straightened immediately, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand with a briskness that said she was done with crying and ready to be useful. "Anything," she said. "You tell me what you need." "Thank you." I meant it completely. "Water the roses if you get a chance, the red ones along the front walk. They'll need it before the weather turns." Her face did something complicated, grief and affection, and the particular anguish of watching someone you care for walked toward difficulty with their chin up. She reached out and put her hand on my arm, briefly firmly, the way a person does when words have run out, but presence still means something. I stepped back. I called the car, and while I waited at the curb with my overnight bag at my feet and my bandaged hand throbbing steadily in the April morning cold, I did something I had not done since Eleanor's last night in the hospital. I made a list, not of grievances, not of the ways I had been wronged, not of the years of dinners and tuition payments and quiet acts of provision that had apparently meant nothing. That list would cost me energy I could not afford to spend. This was a different kind of list, a list of phone calls, a list of documents, a list of every door I had ever opened for Bradley Calloway and what it would take to close them quietly, permanently, and in the correct order. The car arrived. I got in. Post Road Motel, I told the driver. He pulled away from the curb, and I watched Meadow Lane slide past the window, the maple trees, the familiar houses, the turn at the end of the block where Eleanor and I used to walk on Sunday evenings in the fall, arguing cheerfully about nothing important while the leaves came down around us. I'm coming back for the roses, I thought, just not the way he expects. The room cost $47 a night, and it smelled like industrial cleaner and the ghost of someone else's cigarette smoke, and the carpet was the color of old mustard, and the bathroom mirror had a crack running diagonally from corner to corner that split my reflection into two slightly misaligned halves. I stood in front of that mirror for a long moment after I checked in. 68 years old, gray at the temples for so long now that I had stopped thinking of it as gray and simply thought of it as the color my hair was. Lines around my eyes that Eleanor used to trace with one finger on Sunday mornings, saying she could read the whole map of our life together in them, which had embarrassed me when I was younger and which I would give almost anything to hear her say again now. The bandage on my right hand was slightly loose at the edge. I had knocked it against the doorframe coming in, and I pressed it back down carefully with my left thumb the way Dr. Reeves had shown me, making sure the edges were sealed. 68 years old, standing in a $47 motel room on a Monday evening in April, locked out of the house I had owned for 22 years. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress made a sound of protest. I set the overnight bag beside me and looked at it for a moment, the brown leather, the worn gold initials, RAC, the small brass zipper pull that had been loose for 3 years, because I kept meaning to have it fixed and never did, which Eleanor had teased me about with great consistency and no real expectation that I would ever do anything about it. I unzipped it and took out the wooden box. It was not large, about the size of a shoebox, made from dark walnut, with a simple brass latch, the grain of the wood worn smooth along the edges from 22 years of being picked up and set down and carried from place to place. Eleanor had given it to me herself, pressing it into my hands one afternoon, about 8 months before she passed, when she was still well enough to sit at the kitchen table, but tired enough that she needed to rest between sentences. "Keep this with you," she had said, her fingers folding over mine around the box. "Not because you'll need what's inside right away, but because the day will come when you will, and I want you to have it close." I had not asked her what she meant. I had learned in 31 years of marriage that Eleanor said exactly what she meant, and meant exactly what she said, and that the worst thing you could do was push her to explain herself before she was ready. I opened the latch now and lifted the lid. The photograph was on top as always, the two of us on our honeymoon in Savannah, standing on the riverfront with the water behind us. Eleanor laughing at something I had said. Her hair shorter than her hand on my arm. I had been 37 years old in that photograph. I had been so certain I knew what my life was going to look like. Beneath the photograph, her small pearl earrings from our wedding day, wrapped in a square of velvet the color of pine needles. A folded note from Bradley's 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Patricia Donnelly, which read, "Bradley is a gifted student with tremendous potential. He approaches every challenge with genuine curiosity and an eagerness to do right by the people around him." I had kept that note for 20 years. Reading it tonight produced a pain in my chest that was distinct from grief, something more complicated. The specific ache of a thing that was once true and had since become a different kind of evidence. And at the very bottom, beneath everything else, a sealed white envelope. My name on the front in Eleanor's handwriting, the careful, deliberate cursive she used for everything that mattered, pen pressed firmly into the paper as though she wanted the words to leave a mark that lasted. For Arthur. Open only if the day comes. My hands were not entirely steady as I broke the seal. The bandaged right hand made it awkward, and I had to use my left thumb to work the flap open, which took longer than it should have, and the extra seconds gave me more time than I wanted to think about what I was about to read. The letter was 3 pages written on the pale blue stationery Eleanor had always used. The good kind, heavier than ordinary paper, because she said cheap stationery was a false economy, and she had never seen the point of writing something important on paper that wouldn't hold up. She had written it, she explained in the opening paragraph, 2 years before she passed, not long after she had begun to notice things about Bradley that quietly frightened her. Small things at first, the way he spoke about the house during family dinners, as though it were already his, when I take over the mortgage when we eventually move into this neighborhood. The way he had started referring to their savings in conversations with Chloe, just loudly enough that Eleanor could overhear, as what we'll have when things sort themselves out. The way he had looked once at the pearl earrings in Eleanor's jewelry box when he thought no one was watching, not with affection, but with the calculating expression she recognized from his childhood Christmases when he was small enough to shake presents and try to guess their contents before anyone gave him permission to open them. I don't write this to condemn him, Eleanor had written. He is our son, and I love him without condition. But I write it because I know you, Arthur. I know that you will want to believe the best of him long past the point where the evidence has stopped supporting it. You will forgive him 3 times before you let yourself see clearly. That is one of the finest things about you. It is also the thing that will hurt you most if you let it. I had to stop reading. My eyes had gone hot, and my throat had closed around something that felt like it wanted to become a sound, but could not find its way out. I pressed the heel of my left hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose slowly and deliberately until the feeling subsided enough to continue. The room's heater clicked on, making the sound the front desk clerk had warned me about, like someone clearing their throat politely, and then settled into a low, steady hum. You sat across from me every single morning, I thought, looking at Eleanor's handwriting on the page. You made the coffee, and you read your book, and you never once let me see how worried you were. You carried all of this alone for 2 years so that I wouldn't have to carry it before I needed to. Outside the motel window, the post road was quiet now, a few headlights moving past the distant sound of a truck downshifting on the highway overpass 2 blocks north. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that was continuing without particular interest in what was happening in room 8 of the post road motel. I looked back at the letter and turned to the second page where Eleanor's handwriting continued in the same steady, deliberate lines. She had attached documents. The first was the deed to 14 Meadow Lane, the property Eleanor and I had purchased together in the spring of 2003, held under what the document described as joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Eleanor had written a margin note beside this phrase in red ink in her practical, no-nonsense way, as though she were annotating a student's essay. This means when one spouse passes, full ownership transfers automatically and entirely to the surviving spouse. No court process required, no probate. Bradley's name does not appear on this deed in any capacity. I read that margin note 3 times. The second document was her will notarized, witnessed by 2 independent parties, signed 3 years before her death. All assets left to me without exception. A separate paragraph addressed any potential challenge. I am of sound mind and full legal capacity at the time of this signing, and I make this distribution freely and without coercion. Any challenge to this shall be defended by Sterling Vance, Esquire, who holds a certified copy in his office. Sterling Vance. Eleanor had found him 12 years ago when she needed help updating her will after her mother passed. She had come home from that first meeting and said, "He doesn't perform, Arthur. He just tells you exactly what is true, even when it's uncomfortable. That's rare." And she had trusted him with everything that mattered, including this. I set the documents down carefully on the bedspread beside me and looked at them. Eleanor's name on the deed, her signature on the will, the red margin note in her handwriting, and felt something shift in my chest that I did not immediately have a name for. It was not relief, not yet. It was something closer to the feeling of solid ground appearing beneath your feet when you had been falling and had not yet understood in which direction. She had known. She had sat in Dr. Morrison's office and received news that most people cannot hear without coming apart. And somewhere in the weeks that followed, she had gone to Sterling Vance's office on Park Avenue and arranged everything with the precise, unhurried care of a woman who intended to be useful to the people she loved long after she was gone. And she had never said a word to me about any of it. I reached into the box one more time. My fingers found something I had not noticed in the years I had been carrying this box, tucked flat against the very bottom beneath the documents, a small notebook with a faded blue cover and a spine slightly cracked from use. I opened it. Page 1 in Eleanor's handwriting in the same blue ink she used for grocery lists and birthday cards, and the notes she used to leave on the kitchen counter when she went to bed before me, sourdough for a lonely morning. Below it, a recipe written out in full with margin notes in different colored inks added over what appeared to be years' small adjustments and reminders and encouraging remarks addressed directly to whoever would one day be reading this alone. At the bottom of the page, dated 6 months before she passed. Arthur, this one is for you, not for company. Make it when you need to remember that good things take time and cannot be rushed. I love you. I always have. I always will. I sat on the edge of that $47 bed and held my wife's recipe book against my chest with my one good hand. And for the first time since I had stood on the porch of my own house and watched the lock refuse to know me, I let myself feel the full weight of everything. Not quietly, not with any dignity at all. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old and has been waiting a long time for permission. When it was over, I felt hollowed out, but steadier the way a field looks after rain emptied of something it had been holding too long and better for it. I looked at the phone on the nightstand. It was past 11 o'clock. I picked it up, found the number I had never needed to use before, and pressed call. It rang twice. "Sterling," I said when he answered. My voice was rough at the edges, scraped clean. "It's Arthur Calloway. Eleanor left me everything I need, and I need your help." Sterling Vance was 61 years old, lean and precise in the way of men who had spent 4 decades choosing every word carefully before they spent it. He was a partner at a Manhattan family law firm with offices on the 41st floor of a building on Park Avenue, and he did not pick up unknown calls at 11 o'clock at night unless he had reason to expect them. He picked up on the second ring. "Arthur," he said, and his voice carried the particular quality of someone who had been halfway waiting for this conversation for quite some time. I told him everything sitting on the edge of that $47 bed with Eleanor's recipe book still in my lap. I laid it out from the beginning. The smart lock, the suitcases, Martha's photograph, Bradley's text message, the wooden box, the letter, the deed, the will. Sterling listened without interruption, without making the small sounds people make when they want you to know they are paying attention. He simply listened the way a surgeon listens to a patient describe symptoms gathering, assessing not yet ready to speak. When I finished, the line was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Eleanor brought me the updated documents 3 years ago," he said. "She asked me to keep certified copies in our safe. She said, and I'm quoting her directly, that she hoped I would never need to use them, but that if I did, she wanted everything in order." A brief pause. "She was a remarkable woman, Arthur." "Yes," I said. "She was." Sterling moved quickly after that, the way good attorneys do when the facts are clean and the path ahead is clear. He confirmed what Eleanor's letter had already told me under Connecticut law. The house on Meadow Lane had been held in joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which meant that when Eleanor passed, full legal ownership transferred to me automatically and completely. No court process was required, no probate proceeding, no opportunity for dispute. Bradley's name had never appeared on that deed. He had no ownership interest, no legal claim, and no standing whatsoever to challenge a sale. "What about the will?" I asked. "Notarized, witnessed by 2 independent parties, filed with this office," Sterling said. "Airtight. He could attempt to challenge it, but he would not succeed. Eleanor was thorough." "She always was," I said. "I want to sell the house," I said then. The words came out steadier than I expected, which told me I had already made this decision somewhere between the Uber and the motel room before I had consciously admitted it to myself. Conrad Hawthorne Sterling, explained, was a 55-year-old real estate investor based in Westport, Connecticut, who specialized in purchasing residential properties for cash with rapid closings. He had reviewed the preliminary documents Sterling had forwarded the previous evening and was prepared to offer $2.1 million with an escrow closing within 48 hours. The house had been appraised at $2.4 million the previous spring, but the speed and certainty of a cash transaction, Sterling noted, had its own significant value that did not appear on any appraisal report. "Tell him yes," I said. Sterling made a sound that was the closest he ever came to expressing satisfaction. "There is one more matter," he said. "Before we transfer possession to Mr. Hawthorne, I strongly recommend we compile a formal inventory of every personal item you intend to remove from the property, documented, signed, and time-stamped before the closing. This protects you against any future claim that you removed items belonging to the marital estate without authorization." "Do it," I said. "And Arthur, I want to file a restraining order naming Conrad Hawthorne as the protected party to be served simultaneously with the closing paperwork." He paused to let me ask, and I did. "Once Mr. Hawthorne becomes the legal owner of that property, any attempt by Bradley or members of his household to enter the premises, harass Mr. Hawthorne, or interfere with his possession constitutes a violation of that order. A restraining order, once granted by a court, is a legally enforceable document. Violating it is not a civil matter but a criminal one, meaning law enforcement can arrest the violating party on the spot without requiring a separate warrant. It gives police clear authority to act the moment Bradley shows up and causes trouble." "He's going to be very angry," I said. "Yes," Sterling agreed, "which is precisely why we file the order before he gets home." Outside the motel window, the post road had gone almost entirely quiet. A single set of headlights moved past, slow and unhurried, and then the street was dark again. I looked at Eleanor's handwriting on the cover of the recipe book, the way the ink had faded slightly at the edges of each letter. "Sterling," I said, "Eleanor told me once that she hired you because you tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. So tell me something true right now." A pause. "The law is entirely on your side," he said. "Bradley has no legal claim to that property. None. What he did choosing the morning of your discharge to lock you out of your own home, that may say a great deal about who he is as a person, but it does not create a legal right where none exists." "That's the truth," I said. "That is the truth," he confirmed. I ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of room 8, holding Eleanor's recipe book in my one good hand. The heater clicked and hummed. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and closed. 2 hours, I thought. Tomorrow morning, 2 hours is all I need. I gave myself 2 hours. That was the number I had settled on somewhere between ending the call with Sterling and lying down on that mustard-colored bedspread without any real expectation of sleep. 2 hours to close every financial door I had ever opened for Bradley Calloway. It seemed both too long and not nearly long enough, but it was what the morning would give me before I needed to be at Sterling's office, and I have always believed that a man who cannot work within his limits has not yet understood them. I was at the Bank of America branch on Greenwich Avenue when the doors opened at 9 o'clock. My bandaged hand was tight in the cool morning air, and I had the wooden box in my overnight bag and Eleanor's recipe book in my jacket pocket because I had decided the night before that I was not going to leave either of them anywhere. I was not. The branch manager was a young man named Kevin Marshall, who wore his hair neatly parted and had the careful, measured manner of someone trained to deliver unwelcome news without producing a scene. I told him I needed to remove Bradley Calloway as an authorized user on my personal checking account and close the associated supplementary access immediately. Kevin asked for my identification, typed for a moment, and then looked up at me with an expression that was professionally neutral, but not quite successfully so. "Mr. Calloway, I want to confirm, once we remove the authorized user and close supplementary access, any cards issued under that access will be declined immediately. Purchases in progress, recurring charges, everything." "I understand," I said. "And you're certain you want to proceed?" I looked at him steadily across the counter. "I am entirely certain." It took 11 minutes. I had been opening and managing accounts at that branch for 19 years, and it took 11 minutes to undo what I had set up for Bradley when he was 22 years old and just starting out and needed, I had thought, a safety net. I understood now that he had thought of it as something considerably more permanent than that. Kevin printed the confirmation and slid it across the counter. Then he paused, his hand still on the paper, and looked at me with an expression that had shifted slightly less professional, now more human. "Mr. Calloway," he said quietly, "there's something else I think you should see." He typed again, turned the monitor slightly toward me, and pointed to a line in the account history. 3 months ago, Bradley had been added as a joint account holder on my savings account, not merely as an authorized user, but as a co-owner, which carried significantly different legal weight. A joint account holder has full legal access to all funds, and the account can withdraw without limit and cannot be removed without their own consent under standard bank policy. Except that the signature on the authorization form, Kevin told me carefully, did not match the signature on file for my account. Someone had submitted a form with my name on it. The signature was close enough that a routine processing clerk might not have flagged it, but Kevin had pulled the original card application from 19 years ago for comparison, and the discrepancy was visible once you knew to look. "I'm going to need to flag this internally," Kevin said. He had gone very still in the way of someone who understood the weight of what he was looking at. "This appears to be an unauthorized account modification. That's a serious matter, Mr. Calloway. Potentially a criminal one." He printed a second document, the comparison between signatures, the account modification record, the timestamp, and placed it in a folder with the first confirmation. "Keep this," he said simply, and slid it across to me. Not as a bank employee following protocol, as a person doing the right thing. I thanked him and meant it. From the bank, I drove 2 blocks north to the Chase branch and called their customer service line from the parking lot rather than going inside because the call was faster. Bradley had a supplementary credit card on my Chase account. I had added him 4 years ago when he told me he was having a difficult quarter with his business and needed temporary support, and temporary had quietly become permanent in the way that accommodations tend to do when no one sets an end date. I reported the card lost, requested immediate cancellation, and was done in 8 minutes. The representative read me a confirmation number that I wrote on the back of a gas station receipt and folded into my breast pocket. 2 cards, both gone. Somewhere in the Bahamas, Bradley's wallet had just become considerably lighter without him knowing it yet. The Toyota dealership on West Putnam Avenue was my third stop. The sales manager, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who had sold me the car 3 years earlier and remembered me with the particular warmth of someone who had made a good commission, looked genuinely startled when I told him I wanted to sell it back on the spot. "Relocating." I told him, which was true enough. He offered $18,000, which was several thousand below market value. I did not negotiate. I did not have time to negotiate, and beyond that, the number did not carry the weight it once might have. I had spent the previous evening reading Eleanor's handwriting by the light of a $47 motel room lamp, and somewhere in that process, my relationship to certain categories of loss had been rearranged. Gerald counted out the cash. I requested it that way deliberately, because I wanted nothing electronic that Bradley could monitor or trace, and I signed the title over and called a cab from the dealership parking lot. $18,000 in a bank envelope in my jacket pocket. A folder of bank documents in my overnight bag. A bandaged hand that throbbed steadily through all of it, keeping its own reliable time. The cab took me to Sterling's office building on Park Avenue, where I was expected at 11 o'clock. In the lobby, I checked my phone. One text from Bradley sent 40 minutes ago from what was presumably a Bahamas area code. "Dad, how's the hotel? Hope you're comfortable. Let me know if you need anything." I read it once, put the phone back in my pocket, and stepped into the elevator. He had no idea. That was the last moment I allowed myself anything resembling satisfaction, because Eleanor had told me once that satisfaction was a doorway worth walking through quickly and not lingering in. "The work isn't done when you feel good about it," she used to say. "The work is done when it's done." The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. Sterling was waiting in the hallway with Conrad Hawthorne, a broad-shouldered man with a firm handshake and the economical manner of someone for whom the transaction itself held no drama. He had reviewed the documents Sterling had forwarded the previous evening. He had 3 questions, all of them precise. He was ready to sign. So was I. Conrad Hawthorne reviewed the documents the way a man reviews things when he already knows what they say, but intends to demonstrate that he reads everything anyway. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried, with the calloused handshake of someone who had started his career swinging a hammer before he started signing checks, and he asked exactly 3 questions about the property survey date, about the status of the roof inspection from the previous spring, and about whether the appliances conveyed with the sale. Sterling answered all 3 without consulting his notes. Conrad nodded once after each answer, the nod of a man filing information rather than acknowledging a conversation, and then he uncapped his pen and signed where Sterling indicated. I signed where Sterling indicated. The restraining order application had already been filed with the Greenwich Superior Court that morning, naming Conrad Hawthorne as the protected party against harassment or trespass by Bradley James Calloway or any member of his household. Sterling set his pen down and looked at me across the mahogany desk. "From this moment," he said, "the property at 14 Meadow Lane, Greenwich, Connecticut, belongs to Mr. Conrad Hawthorne." I looked at my own signature on the closing documents. I looked at Eleanor's name on the deed beside mine the last time I would see them together on anything, and felt something move through my chest that I did not immediately have a name for. It was not relief, not yet. It was something closer to the feeling of solid ground appearing beneath your feet when you had been falling and had not yet understood in which direction. She had known. She had sat in Dr. Morrison's office and received news that most people cannot hear without coming apart, and somewhere in the weeks that followed, she had gone to Sterling Vance's office on Park Avenue and arranged everything with the precise, unhurried care of a woman who intended to be useful to the people she loved long after she was gone, and she had never said a word to me about any of it. Sterling slid one more envelope across the desk, small, white sealed. My name on the front in Eleanor's handwriting. "She left this with me when she finalized the will," Sterling said. "She told me to give it to you if this day ever came. She said you would know when to open it." I picked it up and held it without opening it. The paper was slightly heavier than ordinary envelope stock, the good kind Eleanor always bought because she said cheap stationery was a false economy. I put it in my jacket pocket against my heart and stood. "Sterling," I said. "Arthur, thank you for everything she set in motion, for holding it until I needed it." He nodded, and for just a moment his professional composure shifted not much but enough. "She made it very easy to do the right thing," he said. "She always did." I left his office at 12:45 and took a cab directly to Martha's house on Meadow Lane. I did not look at number 14 as we passed it. I looked at Eleanor's rose bushes along the front walk, still holding their red blooms in the April chill, and then I looked away. Martha opened her front door before I reached the porch, which told me she had been watching the street. "Arthur." She said my name with the particular relief of someone who had been watching the street for hours and had finally seen what they were waiting for. She was still in her raincoat, as though she had not allowed herself to fully come inside since our conversation that morning. I took the envelope from my jacket pocket. Not Eleanor's, a different one, plain white with Bradley's name written on the front in my block print, the same handwriting I had used for 30 years on birthday cards and Christmas envelopes. "When Bradley comes home," I said, "and he will come home in a few days, I need you to give him this. Not to Chloe, not to Diane, only to Bradley, only when he is standing in front of the house." Martha took the envelope with both hands, the way you hold something you understand to be significant. Her eyes had gone bright again, and she was not trying to hide it. "Of course," she said. Then quietly, "Where are you going, Arthur?" "Portland," I said. She blinked. "Oregon." "Eleanor always said the Pacific Northwest had decent bread." I paused. "I have a recipe I've been meaning to try." Martha looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I could see her working through everything she wanted to say and selecting the only thing that actually mattered. She reached out and put her hand on my arm, firmly the way she had that morning. "Water the roses," she said softly. "I know. I'll water them every week until the frost." "Thank you, Martha." Her chin trembled once hard. "She would be so proud of you," she said. "Eleanor. She would be so proud." My jaw tightened against something that wanted to come loose. I covered her hand with mine for exactly 1 moment, and then I stepped back and walked to the cab. The Greyhound station on Millbank Avenue was a 12-minute drive from Martha's house. The bus to Portland departed at 2:15 in the afternoon, a long route 2 days with connections through New York City's Port Authority bus terminal, then west through Chicago's downtown station, then northwest across the country through landscapes that grew steadily wider and quieter as the miles accumulated. I had chosen it deliberately. I could have flown. I could have been in Portland by evening, but I needed the time, the specific unhurried time that comes from sitting in a moving vehicle with nothing required of you except to watch the country change outside the window. I needed to set things down before I arrived somewhere new and had to begin being a person again. I found a window seat near the back. I put the overnight bag in the rack above and kept Eleanor's recipe book in my lap. The bus pulled out of Greenwich at 2:17, 2 minutes behind schedule, and I watched the town I had lived in for 22 years slide past the glass, the post road, the library on West Putnam, the turn onto the avenue that led north toward the hospital, where I had spent 3 days with a drainage tube in my wrist while my son arranged his travel plans. I opened Eleanor's recipe book to the first page, Sourdough for a Lonely Morning. I read the words she had written at the bottom of the page, "This one is for you, not for company," and felt the full length of the road ahead of me settle into my chest, not as a weight exactly, but as a direction. Outside the window, the Connecticut countryside moved past the last of the April maples, catching the afternoon light, the familiar landscape of a life I was leaving at 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon with one bag and one book and a sealed envelope in my pocket that I was not yet ready to open. Somewhere in the Bahamas, a phone was buzzing on a nightstand. Bradley would be at dinner by now. He would reach for his card when the check came. He would assume the decline was a glitch and try again. He would try a second card. He would begin for the first time to understand that something had shifted in a direction he had not anticipated and could not reverse. I looked out at the Connecticut sky, the particular pale blue of a late April afternoon, and felt for the first time since 6:43 that morning something that was not quite peace, but was moving steadily in that direction. "Hold on, Eleanor." I thought the same thing I had thought the night before in room 8. "I'm on my way." I was somewhere outside of Chicago when Martha called. The bus had been running through the flat Midwestern dark for 3 hours, the highway lights strobing past the window in long orange intervals, and I had been sitting with Eleanor's recipe book open in my lap without actually reading it, doing the particular kind of not thinking that long-distance travel makes possible, the mental state that is not sleep and not wakefulness, but something in between, where the noise of your own thoughts finally runs low enough that you can hear the quiet underneath. My phone lit up on the seat beside me. Martha Higgins, 7:42 p.m. I picked up before the second ring. "They're back," she said. Her voice was careful in the way it had been when she handed me the photograph over the hedge. Bradley and Chloe and Diane. The car pulled up about an hour ago, one of those big black airport SUVs. "Tell me," I said. She took a breath that I could hear clearly over the road noise. "They were laughing when they got out, Arthur. All 3 of them. Diane had so many shopping bags she could barely manage them. Bradley looked like a man coming home from the best week of his life. He was walking up the front path, and he was still smiling when he reached for the door." I pressed my back against the seat and looked at the darkness outside the window. "The smile left his face like someone turned off a switch," Martha said. "He tried the lock again, then again. Chloe said something to him, and he held up his hand to stop her, just held it up like this without looking at her, and he tried the old code on the keypad. Nothing. And then the door opened from inside. "Conrad," I said. "Conrad," she confirmed. Big man, very calm. He stood in the doorway and looked at them the way you look at strangers who have rung your bell by mistake, and said very quietly, "Can I help you?" Just like that, like they were nobody. Something tightened in my chest that I did not examine too closely. "Bradley said the house was his," Martha continued. His voice was doing something I haven't heard from him before, not angry exactly, more like a man who has just stepped onto ice and is not yet sure whether it will hold. Conrad said, "I have the deed. Would you like to see it?" And he said it so quietly, Arthur, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, to be standing in a doorway telling a man that the home he thought he owned now belonged to someone else. Outside my window, a water tower slid past with a town name painted on it that I didn't catch. "That was when Diane started," Martha said, and I heard her exhale slowly. She was screaming that it was her daughter's house, that Bradley had been robbed, that someone needed to investigate. Conrad didn't raise his voice once. He pointed to the restraining order notice posted beside the front door. Sterling had arranged for it to be served and posted that morning before their flight landed. And he said very calmly that if any of them remained on the property or continued to interfere with his possession of it, he would contact law enforcement and they would face criminal charges for violating the order. Sterling had made certain the order was served before Bradley's plane touched down. Bradley had no legal ground to stand on from the moment he stepped out of that SUV. Officer Danny Pratt arrived about 10 minutes after that, Martha said. He's a young fellow, mid-30s, lives 2 streets over on Elm. I know his mother from the library board. He came and spoke to Bradley very calmly, very professionally. Told him Conrad Hawthorne was the legal owner of the property, that the sale had been properly recorded with the town clerk's office, and that continued presence on the premises would constitute a criminal violation of the restraining order. Did Bradley argue? He tried. Martha made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said there must have been a mistake, that he had rights as a family member, that someone needed to investigate. Officer Pratt told him very evenly that family relationships do not create property rights, and that if he believed a fraud had occurred, he was welcome to retain an attorney, but that right now he needed to step back from the property line. I closed my eyes for a moment. Through the window, a highway overpass threw a brief shadow across the bus. Then his phone rang, Martha said. He looked at the screen and his face just collapsed, Arthur. He went from arguing with Officer Pratt to standing absolutely still, like the air had gone out of him. Chloe grabbed his arm and asked what was wrong, and he said, loud enough that I heard it clearly from where I was standing, he said, the bank, the collateral. And then he didn't say anything else. The loan. $380,000 borrowed against the house as collateral for his business. A house that was no longer his, that had never legally been his, and whose title transfer to Conrad Hawthorne, the bank's collateral department, had discovered upon the recorded deed, change filed with the Greenwich town clerk that afternoon. When a property used as loan collateral is transferred to a new owner without the lender's knowledge or consent, the bank has the right to call the loan immediately, meaning the full outstanding balance becomes due at once. Bradley's business assets would be frozen pending resolution. His operating accounts would be inaccessible. Everything he had built his business on had just evaporated on a Tuesday evening on the sidewalk in front of a house that no longer knew his name. Diane sat down on the curb, Martha said quietly. Just sat right down on the concrete in her good coat with all her shopping bags around her and put her face in her hands. And Bradley. A pause that carried considerable weight. He sat down next to her, Martha said. Not because he was tired, Arthur. He just sat down like his legs decided for him. I looked out at the darkness beyond the highway glass. A long silence stretched between Martha and me, the comfortable kind that exists between people who do not need to fill it. Martha, I said, that was a lot to witness. I'm fine, she said immediately, and then contradicted herself by clearing her throat in the way she did when she was trying not to cry. I gave him the envelope when the officer finished talking to him. He read it right there on the sidewalk. Chloe tried to read over his shoulder and he turned away from her, and his chin started shaking. Arthur, he pressed his mouth together very hard, but his chin was shaking. I know, I said. Whatever I had written in that letter, it was the truth, just the truth, nothing more. Another pause. Then Martha asked very gently, are the roses still there? Eleanor's roses along the front walk? Her voice had the particular softness of someone who already knew the answer, but needed the ritual of the question. Still blooming, Martha said before I could ask. Even now, Arthur, a few of them still. Good, I said. Thank you, Martha, for all of it. I ended the call and sat for a long moment with the phone in my hand, and Eleanor's recipe book open in my lap, and the American Midwest moving past the window in the dark. I thought about Bradley sitting on the curb beside Diane Mercer with Chloe's hand on his arm and his face doing something it had not done in a very long time, something honest and unguarded and entirely too late, and also perhaps exactly on time. I did not feel what I had expected to feel. What I felt was older than satisfaction and heavier and sadder, the feeling of a consequence arriving that you had hoped for 30 years would never be necessary. I opened Eleanor's recipe book to the first page and read her handwriting until the words blurred and steadied again. Good things take time, she had written, and cannot be rushed. Portland was still a day away. I had time. Portland in early May has a quality of light that Connecticut never quite manages, softer, more patient, filtered through clouds that sit low over the city like a ceiling that has decided it belongs there and has no plans to move. I had been in the city for 4 days before I stopped noticing the difference, and another 2 before I started to find it comforting. I was renting a room above a hardware store on Northwest Hoyt Street, $47 a week, which I had chosen partly for the price and partly because the number felt like a message from Eleanor, who had always believed that coincidences worth noticing had a way of announcing themselves quietly to people who were paying attention. The room was small and smelled like sawdust and machine oil from the store below. And in the mornings, the owner, a man named Pete, who wore the same green vest every day and asked no questions, would leave a cup of coffee outside my door on a paper plate with 2 sugar packets and a plastic stirrer. I had not asked him to do this. He simply did it. Portland was that kind of city. On my 5th morning, I walked to Northwest 23rd Avenue with an address on my phone and a growing certainty that I knew what I was going to do with the rest of however much time I had left to do things with. The space was between a wine bar and a dry cleaner, a ground floor unit that had previously housed a flower shop, vacant for 4 months with a brick-back wall and hardwood floors worn smooth in the center and solid at the edges, and a small kitchen in the back with a gas hookup still active. A paper sign in the window read, "For lease." I stood on the sidewalk looking at it for a long time while the city moved around me, indifferent and alive. The property manager, Sandra Kowalski, met me within the hour. She was 49 years old, Polish-American, with the direct manner of a woman who had learned early that efficiency and warmth were not mutually exclusive. She unlocked the door and stepped back to let me look, and I walked through the space slowly. My right hand still wrapped in a lighter bandage, now 3 weeks out from surgery, the deep ache fading to something more manageable. The back kitchen smelled faintly of old wood and cut flowers roses, I thought, and I felt something move in my chest at that. "I'll take it," I said. Sandra looked up from her clipboard. "You haven't asked about the lease terms." 12 months with option to renew, I said. "First and last month's deposit, possession by end of the week." She studied me for a moment with the assessing look of a woman determining whether she was dealing with someone decisive or someone reckless. Whatever she concluded, she wrote something on her clipboard. Then she said without looking up, "I used to have a flower shop. Different city, different circumstances. Lost it in a divorce." She paused. "This space still smells like flowers sometimes when the weather changes." She looked up at me. "Take care of it." "I will," I said. She handed me the key. I was measuring the back wall the following afternoon, trying to determine whether Eleanor's oven specifications from the recipe book would fit the kitchen dimensions when the front door opened. A man stepped in, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with the thick-knuckled hands of someone who had spent his career in professional kitchens and carried the physical evidence of it permanently. He was holding a folded piece of paper. "I heard the space was taken," he said without any particular preamble, "hoping you might need staff. I'm a baker." His name was Hector Ruiz, 44 years old, 20 years in bakeries across the Pacific Northwest, most recently at an artisan shop on Southeast Division Street that had closed when the owner retired. He had his certifications, 3 references he could produce on the spot, and his grandmother's Mexican sweetbread recipe committed entirely to memory. "What kind of bread are you planning to make?" he asked already. Looking past me at the kitchen with the calculating expression of a man measuring oven placement in his head. "Sourdough to start," I said. "My wife's recipe." Something in my voice told him not to ask about the wife in the present tense, and he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with the steady eyes of a man who had worked beside enough people to know which questions were useful and which ones cost more than they were worth. "Sourdough is the most honest bread there is," he said. "Takes patience, can't be rushed. You can't argue with it and you can't shortcut it. You just have to show up and do the work every single day, and eventually it gives you something worth giving to other people." Eleanor had written almost exactly those words on the first page of the recipe book. You're hired, I said. Tomorrow, bring your grandmother's Mexican sweetbread recipe. We have a kitchen to figure out. Hector grinned with the unguarded enthusiasm of a man who loves what he does and has not had enough opportunity to show it recently. I had not seen anyone smile like that in a very long time. The following morning, while Hector and I were hauling the old front counter out to the alley to make room for the display cases we had ordered, a man appeared in the open doorway. He was 67 years old, Nigerian-American, with a voice like the lower register of a church organ, and eyes that suggested he had seen enough of the human condition to have stopped being surprised by most of it. He wore a plain gray coat and carried nothing except a small Bible tucked under one arm. "What are you putting here?" he asked, looking around the space with open curiosity. "A bakery," I said. "My wife's recipes." He nodded slowly. "I'm Thomas Okafor," he said. "Reverend Northwest Glisson Street Community Church, 3 blocks north. We have about 80 families." He looked at the space again, then at me. "I've been praying for something good to open on this block for 2 years. I think you might be the answer to that." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Come back when we open. First loaf is on us." He smiled the smile of a man who had learned that generosity and grief could occupy the same person at the same time without either one diminishing the other. "I'll hold you to that," he said and left. 2 days later, Nora Bates walked in. She was 73 years old, a retired librarian from the branch 4 blocks north on Northwest Overton, widowed 11 years with white hair cut short and eyes that missed very little, and a canvas tote from Powell's Books that appeared to be a permanent fixture on her shoulder. She looked around the half-finished space with the expression of someone conducting an inventory. "What's it going to be called?" she demanded without introducing herself. "Eleanor's Bakehouse," I said. She went very still for just a moment. Then she said, "She must have been a wonderful woman." "She was," I said. "She really was." Nora nodded once with the decisive finality of someone filing something away permanently. "I'll be here when you open," she said, first in line. That evening, I sat on an overturned crate in the back kitchen, Eleanor's recipe book open in my lap. The space around me was quiet, smelling of old wood and possibility. I picked up a pencil and wrote in the margin beneath Eleanor's words on the first page, just below where she had written, "This one is for you, not for company." I wrote, "And a reason to get up in the morning." Then my phone buzzed on the floor beside me, a message from Sterling. "Arthur Bradley has retained an attorney in Hartford filing motion to challenge the property sale on grounds of mental incapacity. He is arguing that grief and disorientation impaired your judgment when you signed the closing documents. You should know. Call me when you can." I set the phone face down on the crate and looked at the brick wall for a long moment. "All right, Eleanor," I thought. Round 2. Sterling called on a Tuesday morning while I was on my knees sanding the base of the new front counter, working the sandpaper along the grain the way my father had taught me 40 years ago in a garage in New Haven, slow, patient, letting the tool do the work rather than forcing it. I had sawdust on my hands and a bruise forming on my left shin from where I had walked into a low shelf the previous afternoon, and my right hand mostly healed. Now it was still tender enough that I was doing the sanding left-handed and making a slower job of it than I would have liked. None of that mattered much. There is something clarifying about physical work when your mind is full of things it cannot yet resolve. The body asks for your attention, and the mind, grateful for the excuse, quiets down. I answered on the second ring. "Bradley has filed a motion to void the sale on grounds of mental incapacity," Sterling said without preamble, which was how he delivered news he considered serious. "I received the paperwork from the Hartford court this morning. His attorney is arguing that grief and disorientation following Eleanor's death, compounded by the physical and emotional stress of your recent surgery, impaired your judgment to the degree that you lacked the legal capacity to understand what you were signing when you executed the closing documents with Conrad Hawthorne." I sat back on my heels and set down the sandpaper. "He's claiming grief made me incompetent," I said. "His attorney is making that argument," Sterling said carefully. "It is not a strong argument. To void a contract on grounds of mental incapacity under Connecticut law, the challenging party must demonstrate that, at the time of signing, the individual lacked the ability to understand the nature and consequences of the transaction, not merely that they were under stress or grieving or acting quickly. You retained counsel, compiled documents, negotiated terms, and completed a legally sound transaction within 48 hours, all of which suggests considerable clarity of mind. But we cannot ignore the motion. We need a formal neuropsychological assessment submitted to the court as evidence of your competency at the relevant time. Across the half-finished bakery, Hector was measuring the back wall for shelving and making a deliberate effort not to appear to be listening. He was not entirely successful, and I appreciated the attempt. "I know someone," I said. Dr. Patricia Owens maintained a private practice in clinical neuropsychology 7 blocks from the bakery on Northwest Thurman Street. I had first encountered her 3 weeks earlier when she had peered through the papered front window of the bakery during a walk and called out loudly enough to be heard through the glass. "What's going into here?" She was 52 years old with close-cropped silver hair and the frank, unhurried curiosity of someone who considered the neighborhood her personal jurisdiction and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. When I had opened the door and told her a bakery, she had said, "Good, this block needed something that smells like something," and walked on. I called her from the back of the bakery while Hector hammered shelving brackets with diplomatic loudness to give me privacy. "Dr. Owens," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you something outside the scope of sidewalk conversation." She listened without interruption while I explained the situation. The motion Sterling's assessment what the court would need. When I finished, she said, "I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I will conduct this assessment with complete professional objectivity. A neuropsychological evaluation is not an advocacy document. If I find anything in our sessions that gives me clinical concern about your cognitive functioning or your capacity at the relevant time, I will report it accurately regardless of what you need for your case. You understand that I wouldn't want it any other way," I said. "Good," she said. "I have a cancellation Thursday morning. Come in at 9. Bring whatever medical records you have from your primary care physician, the surgical records from Greenwich Hospital if you can get them forwarded. It will save us time." The assessment took 3 sessions across 2 weeks, each one 2 hours long. Dr. Owens was methodical and precise in the way of someone who understood that her findings would be examined by people who would look for any reason to discount them, and she documented everything accordingly. She asked me about the sequence of events on the 14th and 15th of April, what I had understood, what I had decided, what I had intended. She asked me to explain the legal structure of the property documents in my own words. She administered standardized cognitive evaluations that measured memory, executive function, processing speed, and judgment under stress. On the final session, she folded her hands on her desk and looked at me with the direct, even gaze she brought to everything. "You were grieving," she said significantly. "Anyone who tells you otherwise would be either uninformed or dishonest. The loss of a spouse of 31 years, combined with a surgical procedure, and the circumstances you returned home to, that is an objectively significant stress load for any person, regardless of age or resilience." She paused. "But grief does not constitute mental incapacity unless it rises to a clinical level that demonstrably impairs the individual's ability to understand the nature of their actions and their consequences. You understood exactly what you were doing on both of those days. The assessment findings are unambiguous on that point, and that is what I will testify to if the court requires it." Something loosened in my chest that I had not realized was tight. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," she said with the brisk practicality that I had come to recognize as her version of warmth. "I told you the truth. That's what you hired me for." Sterling filed the formal response with the Hartford Superior Court the following week. Dr. Owens's full assessment, Eleanor's notarized will, the complete documented timeline of the sale from the evening of the 14th through the closing on the 15th. Kevin Marshall's bank report, flagging the unauthorized account modification, and a detailed account of every decision Arthur Calloway had made in those 48 hours and the reasoning behind each one. The ruling came back on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the motion was filed. Sterling called while I was pulling the first sourdough loaves of the day from the oven, the smell of Eleanor's recipe filling the back kitchen in a way that still every morning stopped me for just a moment before I could do anything else. "Motion denied with prejudice," Sterling said, and I could hear the quiet, carefully contained satisfaction in his voice. "Judge Carol Whitfield, Her written ruling includes the following language, and I am reading directly. This motion appears to represent a bad faith attempt to circumvent a legally sound transaction executed by a man in full possession of his faculties. The court finds the challenge without merit and awards costs to the respondent. I stood at the oven with a tray of sourdough in my bandaged hand and let that settle. Denied with prejudice meant Bradley could not refile the same motion. The door he had tried to open had been closed and locked from the inside, and Judge Whitfield had kept the key. Costs awarded to the respondent meant Bradley's attorney fees for this maneuver would be added to the growing financial wreckage of a strategy that had been losing ground since the moment Conrad Hawthorne opened that front door on Meadow Lane. "How many of these can he file?" I asked. "Technically several," Sterling said. "Practically his options are narrowing considerably. Each failed motion costs him attorney fees he can no longer easily absorb. His business assets are frozen, his credit lines are exhausted, he is running out of ammunition. Arthur, and the ammunition he has left is getting more expensive to fire." I set the sourdough tray on the cooling rack and looked through the pass-through window at the front of the bakery, the brick wall, the display cases, the name above the door that Hector and I had lettered ourselves on a Saturday morning 3 weeks ago. Eleanor's Bakehouse, in plain, honest strokes. "One battle down," I said almost to myself. Hector appeared in the kitchen doorway, reading my face with the accuracy he had developed over weeks of working beside me in close quarters. "How many left?" he asked. I looked out at the Portland sky through the small kitchen window, deep gray, the color of patience, the color of a city that had learned to live with what it was given and find it sufficient. "Enough," I said, "but fewer than before." Hector exhaled slowly and let himself smile, the real one, the unguarded one that reached his eyes and made him look 20 years younger than 44. He went back to the ovens without another word, and the kitchen filled again with the smell of bread. And outside on Northwest 23rd, the morning moved on without particular interest in the outcome of any legal proceeding in Hartford, Connecticut, which was, I thought, exactly as it should be. That night, I was sitting on the overturned crate in the back kitchen with the last cup of coffee from the pot Eleanor's recipe book open in my lap when my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. A message from Warren Stokes, the private investigator Sterling had recommended 3 weeks earlier, a former Connecticut State Police detective who stated facts the way a carpenter measured twice precisely without embellishment. "Arthur, I've been monitoring Bradley's movements through legal channels, public records, court filings, social media. 4 days ago, he made 2 calls to a number registered to a man named Dale Puett in Stamford. Puett has 2 prior convictions for vandalism, 1 for criminal harassment. I don't have what I need yet to connect them directly, but I want you to know I'm watching. Something is coming. Stay alert." I read the message twice. Then I set the phone face down on the crate, picked up Eleanor's recipe book, and turned to the next page. A new recipe, apple pie, with a margin note in Eleanor's handwriting dated the October before she passed. "Bradley always asked for seconds of this one," she had written. "He used to stand at the kitchen counter and watch me roll the crust, asking questions about every step. He was so curious about everything when he was small." I sat with that for a long time. The rock came through the lower left pane of the back kitchen window at 11:47 on a Thursday night. I know the exact time because I had been sitting on the overturned crate with Eleanor's recipe book in my lap and my phone face up on the floor beside me, and I had just looked at the screen to check whether Warren had sent any follow-up to his message about Dale Puett when the sound hit a sharp explosive crack, followed immediately by the musical scatter of broken glass across the kitchen floor. I was on my feet before the last shard had settled. The rock was sitting in the middle of the floor, amid a constellation of broken glass and ordinary landscaping stone, the kind sold in 20-pound bags at hardware stores, round-edged and gray. Nothing written on it, nothing distinctive about it except the deliberateness of its presence and the angle of the broken window above it, which told anyone who cared to look that it had been thrown with force and intention from the service alley behind the building. Sandra Kowalski appeared in the front doorway 4 minutes later, still pulling on her coat, her hair loose around her shoulders. She had been in her office on the upper floor working late, she said, though I suspected from her expression that she had been sleeping on the small couch. She kept there the one she claimed was for afternoon rest, but which bore the particular indentation of someone who spent more nights there than she admitted. I heard it from upstairs, she said, her voice sharp with the adrenaline of someone jolted from sleep into alarm. Her eyes moved to the broken window, to the rock on the floor, to my face. Are you hurt? No, I said. I was across the kitchen. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and called Officer Danny Pratt before I could suggest it, which told me she had already been thinking about this possibility, that the reviews and now this were connected to something she had been watching more carefully than I had realized. Pratt arrived in 18 minutes. He was unhurried, in the way of someone who had learned that arriving somewhere composed was more useful than arriving somewhere fast. He crouched beside the broken glass with a flashlight examined. The window frame looked out into the alley through the gap and asked his questions in the methodical sequence of a man building a file rather than satisfying curiosity. Anyone out there when it happened? He asked. I was at the front of the building. I said, heard it come back, nobody in the alley. He nodded, making notes. Any idea who might want to do this? I have a reasonable suspicion, I said, but I don't have direct evidence yet. I'd rather not name anyone until I do. Pratt looked up from his notepad with the eyes of a man who had heard enough of human behavior to know when someone was being careful rather than evasive, and to respect the difference. Fair enough, he said. File the report, board the window tonight. Get the glass replaced properly tomorrow. Broken glass in a food service space is a health code issue. He handed me a card with his direct number written on the back in ballpoint. Anything else happens, call me first. The following morning, my phone began lighting up before 7. 3 new Google reviews posted overnight from accounts created within the previous 24 hours. The kind of randomly generated usernames that announce themselves as disposable. 1 star each. The content varied slightly in wording, but held to the same essential claims that Eleanor's Bakehouse was operated by a man who had defrauded his own family, that I had stolen property from my son, that I was, in the precise phrasing of one review, a known fraud who had abandoned the people who depended on him. Hector read them over my shoulder at the prep counter, his jaw working steadily tighter with each one. This is Bradley, he said. His voice had the particular flatness of someone keeping anger at a controlled temperature. Probably, I said. Not probably. Hector set his phone down with a firmness that stopped just short of slamming it. Arthur, this is him. He's trying to kill this business before it has a chance to breathe, before anyone in this city has had enough time to know what we actually are. I understood his anger. I felt the same burn in my own chest, sharp and immediate, the way it always arrives, before it settles into the deep, insistent throb that costs more to maintain than it's worth. I had learned something in 68 years, that Hector at 44 was still in the process of discovering anger is useful for approximately 30 seconds. After that, it starts spending money you haven't budgeted for. I know, I said. Let's open the bakery. Hector stared at me with an expression that said he found my composure either admirable or deeply aggravating, and had not yet made up his mind which. Then he untied his jacket, pulled on his apron, and went to start the ovens without another word. That was one of the things I valued most about him. He argued until he was done arguing, and then he worked. By 9 o'clock, 3 customers had come in specifically because they had seen the negative reviews online and driven over to form their own opinion, which was the particular kind of community stubbornness that I had come to understand was a Portland characteristic. All 3 bought bread. All 3 left 5-star reviews from their own phones before they reached the door. The 4th customer that morning was the one I did not expect. She was 29 years old with paint-stained canvas sneakers and a ring light clip attached to her phone case, and the particular alert quality of someone who processed the world primarily through the lens of how it would read to an audience. She ordered a sourdough loaf and 2 Mexican sweetbread, took 3 photographs of the display case before Hector could offer to move anything, and then looked at me with sudden recognition that was not mutual. You're the owner, she said. It was not a question. I am, I said. She set her phone on the counter with the careful deliberateness of someone making a decision. My name is Melissa Grant, she said. I have about 400,000 followers on TikTok. 3 months ago, I stayed in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut through Airbnb. The host's name was Bradley Calloway. She paused, watching my face. I think I owe you something. I looked at her steadily. What would that be? The truth, she said, told to the right people. She explained quickly and without embellishment. She had seen the negative reviews that morning, had recognized the name Calloway from the Airbnb listing, and had already connected the pieces before she walked through the door. She had a following that responded strongly to what she called accountability content, and she had a video she wanted to make, one that told the story of what Bradley had done cross-referenced with his own Airbnb listing and the reviews he had posted about me, with the full receipts visible on screen. "I won't post anything without your permission," she said, "and I won't use anything you don't want public, but I think people should know what kind of person is behind those one-star reviews." I was quiet for a moment. Outside on Northwest 23rd, the morning foot traffic was picking up people with coffee cups and dogs in the unhurried momentum of a Saturday in a city that took its weekends seriously. "Tell the truth," I said. "That's all I ask. Don't exaggerate, don't dramatize, just tell exactly what happened." Melissa Grant nodded with the focused expression of someone who had already been composing the video in her head since she walked in. "That's all I ever do," she said, picked up her bread and her Mexican sweetbread, and walked out into the Portland morning. By that evening, Warren had sent a message. "Arthur, Melissa Grant's video just crossed 800,000 views. Comments are running about 95% in your direction. Bradley's Airbnb listing has been taken down. Platform suspended the account pending review. And I have confirmation on Dale Pewitt. He received 2 calls from Bradley's number the day before the window was broken. I'm still building the direct connection, but we're close. Give me 1 more week." I set the phone down on the counter beside Eleanor's recipe book. Hector was watching me from the kitchen doorway, flour on his forearms, waiting. "Good day," I said. He exhaled a long, slow breath that carried 3 weeks of controlled tension out with it. "Good day," he agreed. Warren Stokes did not deliver information with flourishes. He was 60 years old, a former Connecticut State Police detective who had run a small investigative firm in Hartford for 11 years, and he delivered information the way a good detective closes a case, methodically, with every piece in its correct place, nothing added and nothing withheld. He had been recommended to me by Sterling 3 weeks earlier, and in that time I had learned that the most reliable signal that Warren considered something significant was when he showed up in person rather than sending a message. He showed up in person on a Tuesday morning before we opened, carrying 2 coffees from the shop next door and setting them on the table by the window without being asked. He had learned in the weeks since we had begun working together that I preferred to receive difficult information sitting down with something warm in my hands. He opened his laptop without preamble. "Connecticut is a 2-party consent state," he said, which meant that recording a private conversation without the knowledge of all parties was generally prohibited. "However," he continued, "there is a well-established legal exception: conversations that take place in a public location, an outdoor cafe, a park, a sidewalk, where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy, can be legally recorded by anyone present, including a third party." The outdoor seating at the Starbucks on Greenwich Avenue is fully exposed to the street. No enclosure, no privacy screen, no reasonable expectation that a conversation conducted there is anything other than public. He paused. "The recording holds up, every word of it." He pressed play. The audio had the ambient quality of all outdoor recordings: the background murmur of passing traffic, the faint percussion of other conversations at neighboring tables. But Bradley's voice came through with complete clarity. He was speaking to someone whose responses were lower and less distinct, and the conversation moved through 3 specific subjects: online reviews that would discourage customers from visiting a new business before it established itself; the mechanics of ensuring that negative search results appeared prominently when someone looked up the bakery's name; and after a pause in the recording that lasted about 4 seconds, what he described as direct action if the other approaches proved insufficient. He did not use words like hire or pay or instruct. People rarely do when they are careful. But the meaning moved through the recording the way a current moves through water, present and directional and unmistakable to anyone listening with honest ears. When it ended, the table between Warren and me was very quiet for a moment. My son had sat at an outdoor table at a Starbucks on a Tuesday afternoon in Greenwich, Connecticut, and planned how to destroy something I had built with my wife's recipes in a city he had never visited, on a street whose name he probably did not know, with people whose existence he considered irrelevant to his calculations. Warren. I said, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. Keep the recording. Don't release it yet. Don't use it yet. I looked at him across the table. I want to wait until the moment it does the most good. Warren studied my face for a moment with the assessing look of a man who had spent 30 years evaluating whether people were telling him the whole truth. You're playing a longer game than I expected, he said. I learned it from my wife, I said. He nodded, once closed the laptop and picked up his coffee. We sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other well enough not to fill every pause. Then I said, release it today. Both the Hartford Courant and the Connecticut Post simultaneously, and send a copy directly to Marcus Webb. Warren raised an eyebrow just slightly, the maximum expression of surprise his professional composure allowed. I thought you said wait. I changed my mind, I said. Waiting serves Bradley. Moving now serves the truth. I looked out the window at Northwest 23rd where the morning foot traffic was picking up people with dogs and strollers and the ordinary momentum of a Tuesday in August. Marcus Webb had been Bradley's primary business partner for 2 years, a commercial real estate developer who committed significant capital to a joint venture with my son. If Webb sees this recording, he will make his own decision about what it tells him. I don't need to tell him what to think. I just need to make sure he has what he needs to think clearly. Warren called Sterling from the corner of the room. Sterling made 2 phone calls from his end. By noon, both outlets had confirmed receipt and were reviewing the audio for publication. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, both had posted the story online with the recording embedded and accessible. I was pulling the last sourdough batch of the day from the oven when Warren's message arrived. Marcus Webb terminated his business relationship with Bradley Calloway at 6:15 this evening. Webb's office issued a brief statement citing irreconcilable concerns about professional conduct. His attorney has filed to dissolve the joint venture and has requested a full accounting of all funds committed to the project. I set the tray on the cooling rack and read the message twice. Marcus Webb's joint venture had been the financial architecture that Bradley's entire business operation depended on, not just one contract among several, but the central load-bearing structure around which everything else had been arranged. Without it, Bradley's business had no viable path forward. The operating accounts were already frozen. From the bank's collateral action, the credit lines were exhausted, the Airbnb income was gone, and now the one relationship that might have provided a route back to solvency had been severed publicly with an attorney involved, which meant every future potential partner who searched Bradley's name would find this story before they found anything else. Hector appeared in the kitchen doorway reading my face. The recording, I said. Webb terminated. Hector absorbed that. He looked at the cooling rack at the sourdough loaves Eleanor's recipe had produced at the name above the door visible through the pass-through window. Then he looked back at me. Does it feel the way you thought it would? He asked. It was a better question than I had expected, and I took a moment to answer it honestly. No, I said. It feels like watching something inevitable arrive, not like winning. More like watching a wall finally fall that has been leaning for a very long time. Hector considered that. Is that enough? I thought of Eleanor's margin note in the apple pie recipe. He was so curious about everything when he was small. It's what there is, I said, for now. Warren came in before we opened. It was 20 minutes to 7, the bakery still dark at the front and warm at the back where Hector had the ovens running, and the smell of the first sourdough batch already moving through the space the way Eleanor's bread used to move through the house on Meadow Lane on Sunday mornings, unhurried and certain of itself, filling every corner without asking permission. I sat across from him and waited. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed an eBay seller page, account username, a randomized string of letters and numbers that announced itself as disposable, created 4 months ago. The account had sold 11 items over that period. Warren had highlighted 3 of them. A set of antique porcelain bowls, cream-colored with a thin blue border, described in the listing as vintage chinaware. Excellent condition, set of 6, listed at $380, sold within 2 days. A walnut wall clock described as handcrafted wood clock, mid-century style, minor wear, listed at $290, sold within a week. A small pearl ring described as delicate pearl cocktail ring, sterling silver setting, lightly worn, listed at $160, sold the same day it was posted. Total across all 11 items, $4,230. I looked at those 3 listings for a long time without speaking. The porcelain bowls had been Eleanor's mother's, brought from her childhood home in Savannah when her mother passed, and kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator that Eleanor called the important cabinet, the one that held the things too precious for daily use but too loved to be put away somewhere you couldn't see them. The walnut clock had hung in our front hallway for 19 years, a wedding gift from Eleanor's aunt that she had wound herself every Sunday morning with a small brass key she kept on a hook beside the kitchen door. The pearl ring she had worn on Sunday mornings, not the diamond from our engagement, not the wedding band, but the small pearl ring her father had given her when she turned 16, the one she said she wore when she wanted to feel like herself. I had not seen the clock when I came home from the hospital. I had noticed its absence on the wall without letting myself finish the thought about where it might have gone. Now I understood why. My right hand resting on the table had gone very still, the scar tissue from the surgery pale against the skin, and I watched my own fingers for a moment, the way you watch something external, something that belongs to the situation rather than to you. When were these listed? I asked. My voice came out quiet and entirely level, which took more effort than it would have a week ago. The bowls went up 7 months ago, Warren said. The clock 5 months ago, the ring 4 months ago. He paused. Arthur, this was happening while you were still living in the house, while you were going to physical therapy twice a week for the wrist and coming home to dinners that Chloe occasionally cooked and Bradley occasionally attended. Another pause shorter. She was selling Eleanor's things out of your home while you thanked her for the meals. The coffee cup in my hand had gone cool without my noticing. It was not the $4,000. I want to be precise about that, because it would be easy to mistake what I felt in that moment for outrage about the money, and it was not that at all. $4,000 was an inconvenience. What sat in my chest heavy and immovable was something considerably larger and older and more specific than money. Eleanor was no longer here to protect the things she had loved. She had been gone for 3 years, and in those 3 years the people living in her house had looked at the objects she had chosen and kept and carried across decades of a life, and had seen in them nothing more than a dollar amount and a shipping category. The clock she had wound every Sunday, the bowls she had never used because they were too important to risk the ring her father had given her when she was 16 years old, and the world was still entirely ahead of her. They had priced her history at $4,230 and sold it to strangers. Hector appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, took one look at my face and Warren's expression, and went quietly back to the ovens without a word. The sound of the kitchen closed behind him like a door, giving us the particular privacy of someone who understands when to be present and when to disappear. The account, I said. Can you connect it to Chloe directly? The payment information traces to a Venmo account registered to an email address with a variation of her name, Warren said. Not definitive on its own, but combined with the items themselves which you can identify and which were present in your home, it builds a strong evidentiary picture. This is theft under Connecticut law, conversion of personal property belonging to you without your consent. Bradley's attorney will argue Chloe acted independently, which may be true, but his liability as the person controlling access to your home is not eliminated by that. I nodded. The legal architecture of it was important and I would need it later, but right now it was background noise. There is one more thing, Warren said. He closed the eBay tab and opened another window. Melissa Grant's second video posted this morning. She found Chloe's original TikTok live stream, the one she recorded while you were in the hospital, telling her followers you were a financial burden on the family. He turned the laptop slightly. She cross-referenced it with the eBay listings, the Airbnb records, the bank documentation from the Hartford court filings. The new video's been up for 6 hours. The view count in the corner of the screen read 1.4 million. I looked at that number for a moment. 1.4 million people who had spent some portion of their Tuesday watching the story of what had been done in a house on Meadow Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut, to a woman's pearl ring and walnut clock and the set of porcelain bowls her mother had carried from Savannah. Eleanor said, I said quietly, not to Warren, not to anyone in the room. I was not sure what I meant to say after that. I sat with the unfinished sentence for a long moment, and then I did not try to finish it because some things do not need to be completed to be understood. I closed the laptop gently and pushed it back across the table to Warren. Add it to the file, I said. All of it. Sterling will know what to do with it. Warren gathered his things with the efficient movements of a man who had delivered the worst of his news and was giving me space to absorb it. At the door he paused. Arthur, he said. For what it's worth, she kept the important things. The wooden box, the recipe book, those were still there when you left. I looked at him. Eleanor put them somewhere Chloe wouldn't think to look, he said. Bottom of the linen closet under the spare blankets. She moved them there herself about 6 months before she passed. He held my gaze. She was protecting them even then. The front door opened, and the first customer of the day walked in, bringing the smell of the August morning with her warm pavement and coffee and the particular brightness of a Portland summer that had finally decided to show up. I stood, straightened my apron, and went to take her order. Behind me, in the back kitchen, Hector was already sliding the first sourdough loaves onto the cooling rack, and the smell of Eleanor's bread filled the room, and I thought, she protected what mattered. She always did. I was restocking the front display case when I heard the bell above the door and looked up. Chloe Calloway was standing in the entrance of Eleanor's bakehouse. She was wearing less makeup than I had ever seen on her, and a gray coat I did not recognize cheaper than her usual, the kind of coat that communicates something about the past several months without requiring words. Her eyes moved around the space, slowly taking in the brick wall, the display cases, the name above the counter. When her gaze reached mine, she pressed her lips together with the expression of someone whose rehearsal has just proved insufficient for the actual moment. I wasn't sure you'd let me in, she said. The door is open to everyone, I said. Sit down, Chloe. I'll get you something. She chose the table by the front window, the seat with the clearest sight line to the prep counter, the laptop Hector had left open, and the office door standing slightly ajar. I noticed her choice the way Eleanor had once called my quiet watching part, noticed things without announcing it itself. I set 2 coffees down and sat across from her. Bradley doesn't know I'm here, she said immediately. He'd be furious. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. I need you to know I never wanted any of this. The locks, the house that was Bradley. I told him you deserved better. He stopped listening to me years ago. Her voice caught on the word years in a way that had been designed to catch. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. She looked up, eyes full of tears balanced at the rim with impressive precision, the kind that know exactly how long they can hold before the effect expires. Eleanor had told me once, real tears don't perform, Arthur. They arrive whether anyone is watching or not. While Chloe spoke, her eyes moved briefly and regularly to the laptop screen on the counter, to the filing cabinet visible through the office gap to the prep station. Her gaze returned to my face each time, but not quickly enough. She was not looking at me. She was conducting an inventory. Hector appeared in the kitchen doorway and tilted his head very slightly toward the upper corner of the room above the front counter where Sterling had recommended the security cameras when we opened. I did not look at the camera. I did not need to. I'm scared of what he might do next, Chloe said. To this place. To you. I let a moment settle. Then I said gently and deliberately, I appreciate you coming, Chloe. I want you to know this bakery has security cameras. My attorney recommended them when we opened. They cover every corner of the interior. Everything that happens here is documented. Something moved across her face. Fast, a quarter-second flicker immediately controlled. The tears simply were no longer there. Of course, she said, her voice having shed something smoothly without comment. She finished her coffee in 2 quick sips and stood. Thank you for listening, she said. Warren came back in 2 days as he had promised. He set his laptop on the table by the window without preamble and turned it to face me. The security footage from Wednesday had been sharpened slightly for clarity, but the image was sharp enough without enhancement. Chloe at the table, the moment I stepped into the kitchen, her hand moving to her coat pocket, the phone coming out the 3 steps toward the office door. 47 seconds, every one of them on camera. The transfers spanned 8 months, 43 individual transactions, ranging from $800 to $6,000, all moving from Bradley's business operating account into a personal account registered to a man named Damian Rohr, 41 years old. Westport, Connecticut. No legitimate business connection to Chloe that Warren had been able to establish through any available record. Total $90,000. I sat with that number for a moment. $90,000 moved out of Bradley's business, the business already drowning under a frozen collateral account and a dissolved partnership, into the account of a man Chloe had apparently decided represented her future, while she stood in Bradley's kitchen and flew to the Bahamas on Bradley's credit card and came to Portland to photograph Bradley's father's financial records. "I want Bradley to see this," I said. Warren looked at me carefully. "I know what he did to me," I said. "I know exactly what he is, but he is also a man whose wife has been taking from him for 8 months while he was busy trying to take from me." A long pause. "He deserves to know. Whatever else he is, he deserves that." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. "I'll call him," he said. "All right, Eleanor." I thought, looking at the laptop screen, let's give him the truth, all of it. Bradley arrived 40 minutes after Warren made the call. He looked worse than I had expected. He had lost weight since the last time I had seen him, which had been, I realized, the morning of my surgery, when he had stopped by the hospital, briefly staying 11 minutes, checking his phone twice. The confidence that had always sat on him like a well-fitted coat had been replaced by something raw and less certain, the expression of a man who had been losing ground for long enough that he had stopped pretending otherwise. He stood in the doorway of Eleanor's bakehouse and looked at the space slowly, the brick wall, the display cases, the name above the counter. His jaw worked once before he controlled it. Then he crossed the room and sat down across from me without speaking. I turned the laptop to face him and pressed play. He watched without moving. His eyes tracked Chloe across the screen, the phone coming out the photographs, the 3 steps toward the office door. 47 seconds. When the footage ended, he stared at the black screen for a long moment, his hands flat on the table, knuckles white. I slid the financial folder across to him. He did not open it immediately. He sat with it under his hands the way you sit with something you already know the contents of on some level and have been working very hard not to confirm. Then he opened it. He turned the pages slowly, the transfers, the dates, Damian Rohr's name appearing 43 times over 8 months. His chin began to shake, not dramatically, but with the small contained trembling of someone fighting to hold together and losing the argument. "She was planning this the whole time," he said. His voice had been stripped of everything except the question itself. "I showed you because you have a right to know what is true," I said. "Whatever has happened between us, you deserve the truth." He looked up at me with eyes that had gone red and wet, and what I saw there was not performance. It was the specific pain of a person who just had confirmed what they had been refusing to see. "Why?" he said. "After everything I did, why would you care?" I did not answer directly. Some questions are better answered by what comes next than by words. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Bradley press his mouth together hard and breathe. Because Eleanor would have, I thought, and that is enough. Sterling called on a Thursday morning with the tone he reserved for news that required extra care. "Bradley has filed a new motion," he said. "His attorney has produced what they are representing as an earlier version of Eleanor's will, dated 5 years ago, leaving 40% of the estate to Bradley. They are arguing this document supersedes the one on file with my office." I sat down. "It's a forgery," Sterling said before I could ask. "I identified it within 20 minutes of receiving the filing. Eleanor's signature on this document does not match her signature on any of the 31 original documents held in our files. The pen pressure is different. The angle of the letter forms is different. The way she formed the capital E in Eleanor, she had a particular habit of looping the lower arm back toward the stem, is absent entirely." He paused. "I have retained an independent handwriting examiner. She will have her formal findings within 72 hours. The examiner's report confirmed everything Sterling had identified. Judge Carol Whitfield reviewed the findings at a brief hearing the following week. She asked Bradley's attorney 3 questions, each one landing with the quiet precision of someone who had already identified exactly where the argument failed. Bradley's attorney answered the first two with diminished confidence and could not adequately answer the third. Judge Whitfield's ruling was 4 sentences. The document was a forgery. The motion was denied. Bradley James Calloway was referred to the Hartford County District Attorney's Office for investigation of criminal document fraud, a Class C felony under Connecticut law carrying a potential sentence of 1 to 10 years. Costs were awarded to the respondent. A desperate man will forge his own mother's name. I thought, standing in Sterling's office, reading the ruling on his screen. That tells you everything about how far he had fallen. That same week, Chloe withdrew $43,000 from the joint accounts, the maximum accessible, before Bradley's attorney could file to freeze them, and left Connecticut. Warren confirmed she and Damian Rohr had surfaced briefly on social media in Fort Lauderdale before going quiet. Bradley was alone now, every alliance exhausted, every financial door closed. The trial date in Portland was being set. Sterling called as I was locking up the bakery that evening. "Arthur," he said, "we're ready." "So am I." I thought finally, so am I. Before I reveal the bitter karma Bradley faces when he confronts the new owner right there on the sidewalk. Please comment the number 99 below so I know you are still here with me. Also, please note the following part of the story contains some fictional elements and may not be completely factual. If you do not wish to listen, you may turn off the video right here. The matter had come before 2 courts simultaneously, the Multnomah County Circuit Court in Portland for the harassment and vandalism charges under Oregon law and the Hartford Superior Court in Connecticut for the restraining order violations Conrad Hawthorne held. Both handed down their rulings within the same week on gray November mornings 3,000 miles apart. Criminal harassment vandalism with intent to intimidate filing a false police report in Oregon. And in Connecticut, contempt of the restraining order Conrad Hawthorne held. The combined fines reached $15,000 with 12 months of supervised probation on the Oregon charges and a separate probationary condition in Connecticut. The judge reviewed Sterling's documentation, the Starbucks recording the camera footage, Warren's investigative timeline, Officer Pratt's testimony, and found the record unambiguous. Bradley James Calloway was fined $15,000 and placed on 12 months of supervised probation. The Hartford forgery charges remained pending separately with the district attorney's office, moving forward on their own timeline. Bradley stood at the respondent's table and received the verdict without speaking. He looked like a man who had run out of the energy required to perform any particular response to anything. In the hallway afterward, I walked toward him. He turned when he heard my footsteps. His eyes were red at the rims, not from crying yet, but from the particular exhaustion of someone who had been fighting on too many fronts for too long and had just watched the last one close. I set the folder on the bench beside him without a word. He looked at it. He already knew what was inside the footage, the transfers, Damian Rohr's name 43 times. He had seen it in the bakery. But this copy was his to keep his to read alone at whatever hour the truth finally became something he was ready to sit with rather than run from. The trial date for the forgery charges is February, I said. Sterling will handle everything. Bradley looked at this folder. His chin trembled once hard. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice had been scraped down to something very small and entirely without performance. "Dad, I'm sorry." I looked at my son, truly looked at him the way you look at someone you have known their entire life and are only now in this hallway seeing clearly. "I know," I said. Then I turned and walked toward the exit where Reverend Okafor was waiting with his coat collar turned up against the November cold, and the door opened, and Portland was outside, gray and patient and entirely indifferent to verdicts. "Almost done, Eleanor," I thought. Almost. Bradley arrived at 7:45 on a December morning, 15 minutes before we opened. He was thinner than he had been in the courtroom hallway, wearing a coat I did not recognize, cheaper than anything he had owned in the years when money had felt permanent. He stood inside the doorway and looked at the space, slowly, the brick wall, the display cases, the name above the counter. His eyes stopped on Eleanor's name and stayed there longer than everything else. Hector appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, read the room with the accuracy he had developed over months of working beside me, and retreated without being asked. He had left a small bunch of white flowers on the counter that morning without explanation. He had remembered what day it was. I pulled out 2 chairs at the table by the window. Bradley sat. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at me with the rawness of someone who has run out of the energy required to be anything other than what they are. "I don't know how to start," he said. "You don't have to start anywhere in particular," I said. "We have time." He nodded, his throat moved. "She would have been ashamed of me," he said. "Mom. She would have known exactly what I was doing, and she would have been ashamed." His shoulders began to shake, not dramatically, but with the small, honest trembling of someone who has stopped fighting what needs to come out. I reached into my jacket and set the envelope on the table between us. Eleanor's handwriting on the front, Bradley's name. The stamp she had affixed herself, the address she had written by hand, the letter she had sealed and intended to mail and never had the chance to send. "Your mother wrote this before she passed," I said. "She meant for you to have it. Someone kept it from you." Bradley looked at his mother's handwriting, and his chin shook so badly he could not control it anymore, and he stopped trying. I stood, walked to the counter and placed the employment contract and the navy apron beside it. Eleanor's bakehouse stitched across us the front in plainlars, sauce, bull pints petters. "The broom is in the closet by the back door," I said. "Hector will show you where everything goes." I walked into the kitchen and let the door swing closed behind me. After a moment, the sound of a chair, footsteps, the closet door opening, and then the slow, steady sound of a broom beginning to move across the floor of Eleanor's bakehouse. Done, I thought. Eleanor, we're done. I am 68 years old, and I spent most of those years believing that love alone was enough to hold a family together. It is not. If these family justice stories have taught me anything, it is this: protect what you have built while you still can. Not because the people you love will betray you, but because love without documentation is just a feeling, and feelings do not hold up in court. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you are standing on your own porch with a bandaged hand and 2 suitcases at your feet to understand what Eleanor understood years before I did. Put your name on the deed, write the will, find your Sterling Vance before you need him. I believe God closes certain doors, not to punish us, but to redirect us toward the life we were actually meant to build. Eleanor's bakehouse exists because a lock stopped recognizing my hand. Sometimes the locked door is the answer. In the great family justice and revenge stories families tell across generations, the ending is rarely about winning. It is about who you choose to be when everything has been taken. I chose Eleanor's recipes in a broom in a closet in Portland, Oregon. I would choose it again. If Arthur's story moved something in you, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you truly for staying until the very end. A note worth mentioning: the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If that is not for you, no hard feelings. Step away and find what serves you better.